Okay.
The January 24th, 2023 meeting of the Long Hill Township Planning Board is called to order at 7:42. May I have the announcements, please?
Yes. Call to order and statement of compliance. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by posting a copy of the public meeting dates on the municipal bulletin board and website, by sending a copy of the Echo Sentinel newspaper, and by filing a copy with the municipal clerk. Number 2, meeting cutoff. Announcement is made that as a matter of procedure, it is the intention of the planning board not to continue any matter past 10:30 p.m. at any regular or special meeting or hearing of the board unless a motion is passed by the members then present to extend the meeting or hearing to a later specified cutoff time. Electronic devices. All in attendance excuse me, are asked to mute cell phones or any electronic devices as to not interfere with the proceedings. Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Here now.
I'm so sorry. I've got a very bad tickle, everyone. And it's not COVID. I've been tested. Committeeman Ray is excused tonight. Committeeman Verleza is excused tonight. Ms. Dill?
Present.
Mr. Hands?
Here.
Mr. Jones? Mr. Malinowski?
Here.
Mr. File is excused tonight. Vice Chairman Richardson?
Here.
Chairman Sandow?
Here.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the appointment of the board engineer. You've all seen that in your package. Are there any questions? Can I have a motion, please?
So moved?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Do we have any questions as long as he came all this way? Don, do you have any questions?
I asked all mine during the
Well,
interview.
maybe you could just introduce yourself, give your experience and your
Sure, absolutely.
your areas of expertise, maybe interesting.
Sure. So those that didn't have the pleasure of sitting in the interview,
Right.
my name is Joe Vuch for Van Cleef
Crowd the
Engineering.
mic,
Crowd the mic.
or drag it toward you.
So I graduated Lehigh University and started my career in private land development, and then transitioned over to municipal services. And I've worked through a number of counties, living out in Hoboken, working through Hudson and Bergen counties, and working my way out through Morris County, where I now live in Randolph. So I've been serving Morris, Sussex, Warren, Hunterdon County municipalities for the last decade or so. My area of expertise overall is really land use. That's why I do this with the boards, and municipal services, and a lot of times that's tied to capital improvements and stormwater, managing stormwater, runoff, flooding, other concerns related to hydrology. So I focused most of my career around the technical aspects of hydrology.
Are you familiar with Long Hill? Have you driven around just to get a sense as to?
So most of what I know of Long Hill is what I know of Morris County, and I've been familiarizing myself more now since the opportunity to submit for the RFP and coming on board. My wife grew up in the Chatham area, so I'm familiar with some of the area, but I'm not intimately knowledgeable in Long Hill yet, although we started that process this morning with some tours around town with our chairman. And just getting a feel for the municipality, reading up on the agendas, seeing what kind of applications have been in front of you.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
If you had to give this board advice on how to dry out the town, what advice would it be?
Move.
Find the right developers. I mean, so I think in a municipality like ours, where we're challenged with the Passaic River and its flooding, long history of the development that's been here, the housing stock. You have to proactively look at your master plan opportunities, look at your redevelopment opportunities, and identify the right developers that can come into those critical locations and prepare the right developments that can stimulate the off-track responsibilities of increasing capacity in storm sewers and other things. And then from there, you just continually build along that platform with municipal improvements as well.
Does any developer actually have the ability or authority to fix our water problems?
Not holistically, any of them singularly. It really, comes down to making the right technical planning decisions. Land use and master planning of where we want our housing stock, where we want our commercial districts is part of it, but then you have to look at the long-term capital improvement planning.
Yeah,
Where
but-
we need to improve storm sewers, where we need to provide elevations.
This is an albatross around the neck of the town.
It certainly is. Certainly is. So you're pointing to our FEMA firm map, which in a rare instance of our municipality is all on one panel of the map, so it gives you a nice understanding of the shaded northern and southern regions that are encumbered by the wetlands as well as the floodplain. And this map is dated 2001. The state's delineation dates back about a decade earlier. They're both relatively comparable to each other. But what we see right now is the introduction of the inland flood protection rules by DEP. Those were published in draft in December, which has started the formal process of going through the comment periods and adoption of that. That cycle is going to be from a publication in early December. There was a recent public hearing, and public comments end at the beginning of February.
They don't like the existing regs?
No, they would like to increase the floodplain by as much as 2 feet from our DEP maps, 3 feet off of a FEMA map, and the difference in that 3 to 2 feet is our current regulation difference is if you use a FEMA map, you go 1 foot above. So they're adding 2 feet to all the mapping essentially. And the purpose of that is there's a big difference between our maps and the FEMA maps. The state's maps are for the purpose of public safety and for flood risk assessment. A FEMA map is for flood insurance rate mapping, firm mapping. And so that's all about repetitive loss, severe repetitive loss, where it happens and where people should be supported by the government with insurance. It has nothing to do with the actual public safety, but just identifying the risk for a monetary value. So when we use the FEMA map, we always add that extra foot for the public health safety. Increasing this mapping, in some areas where you're near steep slopes, won't be much of an effect. You'll move the line somewhat negligibly on 2D. In other areas where we have shallow lowlands, it could be very expansive. And so, as a board, we need to be conscious of the rule adoption, which should happen in late March to early April. And that'll be a trigger point for basically the pre and post effective date of grandfathering. There won't be a lax period of grandfathering. Some people may remember in the summer, May into June last year, the state tried to do this as an emergency rule adoption, and they wound up backing off that, and they've now brought inland flood protection forward, and they're gonna bring coastal flood protection forward in the future. In doing that, they've kind of created the 6-month grace period already to get to the point of publication, and so by the time that they get to a rule adoption, they feel that they've provided a year's worth of notice to any developers and applicants. So as of, we'll call it right now tentatively April 1st, if that's an adoption date, if you're not submitted with a complete application to DEP, you don't have to be deemed complete. Your application, by the time it's then reviewed in 90 days, has to be deemed complete without being asked for supplemental information. You'll be under the old rules. And if you're not in before then, you'll be under the new rules. Not only does that mean a change in mapping in where the expanse of the floodplain, but then any of your assessment work that you do, you need to use current rainfall data. So you need to take the 99-2000 rainfall data and apply adjustment factors for stormwater and for flood design. And then you also need to look out the year 2100. So the point of these rules is to look out over the course of the 2000s all the way through 2100 and look to projecting our development in New Jersey and projecting the protection to the future and building the resiliency in now. So for the board, any applications that come before us in the first part of the year, we have to be very cognizant of the applicants, where they are in the process, and what they can tell us about confirming that they're in front of us and they're already in front of DEP so that we can move forward with a respectable vote that can be built. Otherwise, we need to take certain reservations in. If they're in front of us and they haven't been to DEP, there may be a part of their project they won't be able to deliver if we actuate a vote, because once they go to DEP, they'll be told to scale back their development.
Now, there is a dinky little drainage ditch that crosses Main Avenue in Sterling. And that ditch was dug in the 1930s in order to drain part of Sterling down to the river. The problem that we discovered with the
It's a state
Desert
open water,
Ladies-
probably.
Excuse me?
It's probably a state open water because it's connected to the river.
Well, that's the problem, is that the building adjacent to that drainage ditch, we had to build it way back from the road using an existing foundation. This is Desert Ladies. Because we couldn't build a new foundation adjacent to that drainage ditch.
Sure.
Now, if we're gonna revitalize downtown Sterling by building new buildings in whatever style, is that drainage ditch gonna control that redevelopment?
Can control a lot of it. You know, other opportunities would be try to hydraulically disconnect it and potentially culvert it underground. And in doing so, I mean, you'd have to go through extensive DEP permitting, but if you can disconnect it by tie gate and then manage that water as an uphill stormwater discharge that then is collected and conveyed down,
Who's gonna pay for all that?
it would be us. It'd be us and it would be grants. Yeah, as a municipality, not us as the board, obviously. But, you're talking about significant hindrances to some of the things that we want to look at stimulating development, through a downtown core. Areas that we need to be very cognizant of, what approaches we can take and what's developable and what's not. And then from there, we work with our planner to identify the right types of redevelopment that can work now, and then also the larger scale projects that would have to be taken on as a township. Things that would set the table for future larger projects. And that's all really, part of the interface of this board with our township committee and how they work together on planning the initiatives of the municipality and what types of development we want to see come to this board. So my job is the technical side of it. Your job is the analysis of the responsible development, and our planner sets the table for a lot of that with bringing, the creative ideas on how we can stimulate the development in these different corridors.
Now, do developments on Main Avenue have to get state approval because of the presence of that ditch?
They're within 300-foot riparian likely of that ditch, yes.
So anything within 300 feet of that drainage ditch next to Desert Ladies has to go to DEP for approval, as well as site plan approval here?
It's a state open water connected within the mile of a C1 water of the Passaic River. It carries a riparian all the way up, which means it has 300
Is there anything we can do to get a waiver of that? Or do we want to get a waiver of that?
It's not,
Are we?
it's not our position as a board, respectfully.
Do we residents of the
to
town
address
feel
that.
safer because of those regulations?
From flooding, yes. From stimulating our development, no, it handcuffs us. The balance is figuring out what big projects would have to be introduced to make that change, and looking at what that fiscal impact is and where the grants could be supportive of it for redevelopment of a struggling corridor.
Okay.
So if I may, I just have one question following up on Dennis's line there. For the proposed regulations, is there anything specifically you think we as a planning board specifically or a township should do in this time before these regulations are passed, which is fait accompli, right? But-
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly,
And
it-
in roughly pretty much
as
what
drafted.
that's drafted.
As drafted, you will see it be adopted. Unlike some of the other recent changes to regulations, recent like the MS4 permitting that's come down for Tier A, Tier B, and the consolidating to Tier A, there were some changes that were significant. This will go as adopted. The important thing is really for the board, understanding where the applicant is in the process and making sure that they're ahead of the curve with DEP so that we're not looking at plans that won't be able to be built. And, my job in the review of the stormwater analysis is making sure they're using the right hydrographs and they're anticipating the changes in these flows. But overall, as a municipality, one of the public education things I think that gets lost in all of this is that the FEMA maps are for flood insurance. The state's maps and the state's regulations are for public safety. So this mapping change will not change anybody's flood insurance mapping. It won't change the bottom line, what they have to pay for flood insurance. It won't put them into a floodplain for flood insurance. That still goes off the old map. But they are inherently at a higher risk of flooding for public safety. And so the education of making sure people understand, you don't need to go pay for the flood insurance, but you should have concern of where the map shows the line on your property, and if that's accurate, 'cause you don't want people making minor development improvements, especially to residentials, and putting habitable space in areas that could become a problem. Just because you're not paying for it doesn't mean you're not at risk.
But won't the firm maps eventually just follow where things are going with the way that they're going to be
Eventually,
mapping?
yeah, inevitably, as we develop our state, decade by decade, as we develop the nation, right, the mapping, the flooding risk increases, so yes, they will
They
catch
will
up,
change.
but they won't necessarily jump 2 feet like our state has decided to.
Mhm.
Last one quick point, really. Number of years back, there was a flood wall
Yeah.
proposed. So my only suggestion was maybe you should just, if you haven't familiarised yourself as much as you can about the project,
Sure.
and maybe
Yeah.
even speak to the township engineer.
Yeah, and see what I can get my hands on to
Yeah.
understand it, and looking at that and maybe looking at what that would have protected compared to the new rule and the increase, to see how much, significantly had that been built,
Yeah.
1 or 2 decades ago, if we'd be looking at having to improve it again.
Right,
Well, that's the big issue, is if you build it, will be high enough.
yeah.
Right.
Or maybe it's
Right.
changed now, so that may be not enough.
It's like when
And
they,
something else should be done,
Right.
something,
it's like when they build bridges, and then 5 years later, they finish building the big giant freighter, and the freighter can't go under the
Can't-
bridge, so they
right.
have to take the bridge out to get the freighter through.
Right.
but there may be some lessons to learn from
Absolutely,
that.
absolutely,
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you.
Without risking your license,
Well, that's-
there's an awful lot of
Loaded.
chatter in the United States about government regulations that are not based on real science. And my question is, if you just arbitrarily add 2 feet on top of everything in order to redefine the floodplain, is that a government action that ignores real science?
It's a government action that's trying to over-respond after over-delaying their response. If you look at those maps, it's somewhat of an embarrassment, I've said this publicly in public comment meetings with DEP, somewhat of an embarrassment to think that the maps that we use for delineations are decades old, and that our response is to now try to do an emergency action based on climate change and everything else, and instead of investing in the delineations to figure out where we're going in the modeling. I know that takes an exorbitant amount of money and resources, but the state did put good science into developing their approach here. They have been collecting and reviewing precipitation data throughout the state of New Jersey to the point that much of this is predicated on tables per county, and you can hone in on stream gauges and precipitation gauges to see locally how you compare to the rest of the county average for what kind of multipliers you need to use in your design analysis right now. And so there's good science behind the stormwater changes in the increase of storm and the type of delineation work you'll have to do to model a storm through these streams. The bad science would be, adding 2 feet is a way of buying time, respectfully, until the regulations can catch up with more accurate mapping. And that's the only way to do it. So we've got half of it. We got half of the research told us we needed to make a response. And the state is responding by adding feet to bide us time for this decade while we invest in the mapping and delineation.
You may have said this, but that second piece, is that on the
It's
plan?
the intent of DEP to
Right.
get back to work delineating.
And how long do you think that will take or be done by?
Take the better part of a decade.
Okay.
Depends on how many consulting services that they bring in to do that throughout the state and try to get them all on the same, mapping effort and same assumptions.
How many towns are affected as severely as Long Hill will be? Would you care to guess?
I mean, it's gonna range significantly municipality to municipality. I think we're all very conscious of the fact that we're bordered by the Passaic on our 2 sides. So inherently, we're kind of landlocked by it, especially with the swamp to the north. The comparable municipalities and that type of impact, I would look to, like, my experience in Bergen and Hudson, to like the confluence of our Passaic River and the Hackensack River, and coming around South Kearney and coming into the bay together. Looking at those kind of municipalities that are landlocked like that between rivers that receive this kind of flooding, especially in those areas that are more urban developed and fully developed. We're certainly in a unique situation, though, especially in our territories.
What about the towns between here and the Whippany River? Chatham and
I think
up through that way.
we've got a lot of pocketed rolling lowlands that I think really hinder us. And that's our biggest challenge, is how we have, flooding is a common issue throughout the municipality, but it's pocketed. So people are feeling it in different areas in different times in different ways because of the way that the drainage network is falling and the way that the river is pushing.
Well, you certainly see it as you go down the Passaic River towards even Berkeley Heights and New Providence becomes, that's quite a
And that goes all the way
river,
back.
it's a riverbank
Right.
as opposed to here, it's more like a floodplain.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Please.
Just, these are just sort of perhaps really basic, but
Yeah.
with the new regulations, if a building was shown to be in the 100-year floodplain, what would the practical implications be for that? Would it not be allowed to be built? Would it be built but would have to be raised up? Like, how far up would it be raised, that sort of
Yeah, I
thing?
mean, so you'd be looking at first floor elevations of anything that can be built. First of all, it'd have to be permitted. So it's gonna have to go to DEP and be permitted. You're not gonna be able to be in the floodplain without seeking other agency approval other than this board. You're gonna have to live within a general permit or an individual permit. An individual permit is a lot higher of a burden to try to prove your balance test of positives and negatives, if you think of it from like a planning perspective, of how to balance to DEP that this is an appropriate use of this site. At that point, then, once you can permit the project, you're talking about habitable spaces being elevated out of the floodplain, looking at how that balances with the rest of the site and where the parking goes. And, if you have to stick the building up, there's only so much you can do then if you're inherently gonna maybe put parking underneath or have parking obviously in the floodplain, similar to, I'm sure some of you have seen it at ShopRite before, where you might be able to get in and get some emergency groceries, but you're gonna wade through the flooding in the parking lot.
And single-family homes are not exempt, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, if you need a permit, you need a permit, yeah.
Okay, no, the reason I'm asking is, let's say there's an infill property.
Mhm.
Or, you know, or somebody subdivides a property and it's an existing neighborhood, and they subdivide, they're gonna build another house. It potentially would have to be much higher if
Yeah.
it's new
Yeah.
than everything around
And
it.
so they may reasonably come to this board for a height variance that, you know, their basis of proof would probably include the fact that, you know, the permit they needed required them to elevate their home. And so that's why they went up. And then we're gonna talk about whether or not they still need 2.5 stories, they can go down to 2 stories to play with that.
And then another question, it doesn't, well, it does come up in this board, it comes up a lot in the zoning board, because, you have a lot of single-family homeowners who wanna make improvements, and they go over the maximum impervious coverage.
Mhm.
And they combat that with underground storage tanks. And can you talk a little bit about, or what the impacts of these rules would be on that kind of solution?
So the more the floodplain's present on a property, the more that you naturally have a higher groundwater table and you're in positions of being wet. So it decreases the feasibility of putting infiltration systems in or underground storage, you know, type of systems, because you're basically putting the water where the water already is. It's already it's already saturated through those soils. So it's not a good practice to propose one inside of a floodplain. So you're looking to higher ground to propose where to put the infiltration bed.
Just to build on that, not every residential property is in a floodplain.
Absolutely.
Some are on slopes, steep slopes, critical slopes. So stormwater runoff can be a concern. So with putting in what you just talked about, these drainage wells,
Sometimes you could promote underground springs, which is something that we don't necessarily need near steep slopes.
so that may not be the viable solution, and the solution could be putting in a proper drainage system that carries the stormwater away.
Sure.
And then dumps it back into the Passaic or the swamp, wherever that may be.
Particularly when we look at anybody's larger major subdivision opportunities, if there are any, you know, that we want to come to the board and build a section of housing. That's where you're gonna get a road, you're gonna get a public dedication of a road, you're gonna get public improvements of utilities, it's all gonna get wrapped in. It's where you wanna look at not burdening them with the blight of the issue from others, but what comes downhill, they have to address, and they have to
I
convey
don't
it
want it
through.
to negatively affect residents
Right,
that are bordering the property where the work is being done.
absolutely.
If anything, I want to improve the situation
Right.
as opposed to leaving it as is or causing more of a detriment to our residents that are adjacent to those properties.
Absolutely.
How does all this work in the intensively developed cities, which don't have room to build rain gardens and which are paved all over?
Well, they happen to have the good graces of already being imperviously developed into those areas, so there are certain grandfatherings that they can acquire as opposed to, you know, ripping into native lands.
I'm thinking of places like the Ironbound. How do you ever improve the Ironbound if you add 2 feet to the floodplain?
You don't. You look at systematically purchasing waterfront through Green Acres and Blue Acres and creating parklands, which seems to be the trend in those urban areas. Reclaiming waterfront, particularly along the Passaic. If you look down Kearney, East Newark, Topsteiner, that area, and what they're trying to do is reclaim the waterfront to the tide line to create park space and get people out of those habitable spaces. That's how the urban areas deal with the problem.
Parkland don't pay taxes.
It does not.
I think they did do it in the Ironbound. Behind the Ironbound, there is
Yeah.
quite a bit of open space there now by the river.
They just took out the stadium, so maybe they get a little flood storage from taking
I
the
used
stadium
to
out.
go walk across the bridge there to go to the stadium.
There you go.
Anybody have any other questions or want any more education?
Last,
The slides are really helpful, by the
Yeah,
way.
so
That presentation.
That's
you're
a
giving.
presentation from the state, October. So that was as they released the, kind of the pre-draft, so to speak. And they went around the circuit, speaking with municipalities, elected officials, and the, you know, the professionals.
Is that something that could go onto our website, do you think?
Yeah, it's publicly available,
And
right?
I think maybe the most,
Maybe the agenda?
the best way to do that is I can pull the links out directly to the DEP's website where it's still posted.
Perfect.
And that could be an educational tool off our website to direct people to the state.
Or tie it to the agenda.
Yeah, put it on the
and
agenda in the
minutes.
minutes or something,
Yeah.
just the presentation, so people
Yeah,
can.
that's fine.
Absolutely.
No,
Well, I can
either-
also put
Maybe
it on-
both ways, because I
Yeah.
think it's, I
I
think
can put
other
it on the
people would
planning and
find that
zoning
interesting.
page.
Yep.
Whichever's,
Yeah,
just,
so Joe, whatever links you want me to put on there.
Yeah,
let me know.
absolutely.
the actual presentation would be nice, so people can just click into it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I believe this is a PDF, but there were others. The emergency rulemaking was circulated as a,
I'm sorry to say that my observation of that document was that after 20 pages, you felt you were reading the same thing over and over again, and it was oriented toward preschool.
However,
Or is that the way the DEP thinks about its audience of professional consulting engineers?
We're all mere mortals, Dennis.
that's right.
we are all.
Enjoy the simple view.
We're all mere mortals and most of them are lemmings.
I just see pretty colours on a map, so that's.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
Good with
it's a good resource. You know, it is rather repetitive, I believe, on purpose to try to
Reinforced.
Drive the message.
stress the
Tell them
message
what you're gonna
of.
tell them, and tell them what you told them.
Yep,
For the lay people.
Joe, just on these packed rules, because
Yep.
that's what these are all a part of, do we see any other rules coming down the pike that could affect flooding, or is this the?
no, and this is
The flood hazard really
the flood hazard rules. So this is what's gonna affect us, the inland. They separated inland and coastal, so there will be a second release of coastal, but quite honestly, the
That's not gonna affect.
coastal takes a lot of different kind of approach. As you saw after Sandy, right, it took 2 years for FEMA to come in and adjust their own mapping that was almost done when they saw Sandy. So then they went back and they remodeled because of it. The rest of, you know, the climate change, the PACT type of legislation, you know, it's around a lot of other green buzzwords. The green infrastructure amended stormwater rules is somewhat tied to that. Those came earlier, so they're somewhat separated, but electric vehicle ordinances, other types of requirements in stimulating, those types of things, solar and other things. You know, it's meant to be all-encompassing environmental. So this is really your water resource side of it. And the rest of it is a lot more of the, you know, green standards, as you would say.
Just a question on the effective date. It's
Mhm.
in the first, looks like the first month of the second quarter. Is that the hard line, or is
So-
there potential for slippage?
So it's all based on, hold
I
on,
think
let me
it's page
pull,
35.
yeah, let me pull that sheet there. So it's all really based on when the end of the comment period happens, and then when they file with the Office of Administrative Law. So once you get to the end of the comment period, which is gonna be the start of February, first week of February,
Mhm.
how fast they respond to the comments, and they get their responses out, and then they get that published, that's gonna set the hard date. So,
Okay.
You
So
know,
you'll
they
let us know
were-
what that hard date looks like.
yeah, I mean,
There
that
are a
could
lot,
be,
and there are a lot of comments coming.
Yeah.
that could be as
So-
early
They
as
gave them some
late
30-day
March.
window
Right.
to address that.
Right, that could be as early as late March if they really wanna push through.
Yeah.
But I think it's more the first weeks of April, and you think of like when they run the registrar, and when they publish, the first weeks of April, or could lax until the end of April into early May.
Is there any possibility that they are overstepping their authority as granted by the legislature and the governor? Any possibility at all?
My understanding of the governor's office's response was that they could have done this as an emergency rule had they decided to stick to their guns, but they eased off to allow more time for everybody to digest it and comment on it. So I don't play lawyer. I only do that after 10 o'clock at night watching Law and Order. But my understanding is the state is in a strong position to effectuate these without appeal.
Do you know, have these individual towns responded to to this, or is it,
Uh,
who's being
It's a
responsible?
little bit of both. So it's municipalities responding, you know, and using your consultants to respond, as well as there are, you know, consultants, we're licensed by the state, you know, we hold, we hold our state to a certain bar.
The New
so
Jersey, the
sometimes
league, the league is.
Right, like the League of Municipalities will, on behalf
will
of everybody,
comment.
particular municipalities will identify their specific issues with this. And some consultants will bring forward their professional opinion on the matter as it relates to the whole. Just to really publicly participate the right way in government.
Do we know if the town's done this? We haven't, as a town, as far
I
as aware?
don't, I could find out pretty quickly from your town engineer.
Would you, I'd be curious to see if there's anything that we could, should say,
5-minute call,
because
yeah.
we are impacted as much as many other towns. That'd be helpful.
Anybody have any other questions they would like to have answered? Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate your
Thank you,
Yeah,
sticking
good
with us
luck.
tonight.
thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Looking forward to it.
Very good.
Now, as it turns out, we don't have any applications in the works that Joe can start to work on. So if you want to watch him in action, you'll have to start going to the zoning board meetings.
They gotta send me an application before you can come to those, so. Don't show up expecting
I'm
me
on
to be
it.
there.
I'm on it this week.
Yeah, that's I figured.
And the interesting thing about going to the zoning board meetings is that you won't be faced with crowds.
Ooh, there's a
Depends
dig.
on the application.
There's a dig.
No. Yeah.
Thanks again, Joe.
Absolutely.
The next item that we have on the agenda is a discussion of the master plan, and that has devolved into taking comments from the Shade Tree Commission, which Teresa has graciously brought to us. And what do they have to say, and what would they like us to say in return?
Yeah, I'm gonna start at the end of what the Shade Tree Commission wants, and then I'm gonna give some examples as to why they want it, and, there's gonna be some holes, because I've been trying to do the best fact-finding I can, but it's just like, honestly, been going in circles. But obviously, the Shade Tree Commission wants to be aware of any time trees are being removed from a property that the planning board is approving in an application. So, for example, which I emailed Deb about, some members of the Shade Tree Commission saw trees being removed at the Gillette Post Office, like, shopping mall. And I guess that they're pretty in tune with who's filed permits and who hasn't, or what plans have been approved for removal or not. And so, Deb, I don't know if you'll have the answer to this or not, because when we talked, the response was they had approval to be trimming trees over there. And I confirmed with the folks that, I shouldn't say confirmed, I asked again the folks that saw these trees, and they said they are being removed. So I guess, like, part of where a miss is happening is it seems like maybe trees are being removed that we didn't approve. And then there's also the issue of trees being removed that we did approve. And how can the Shade Tree Commission weigh in on this? I guess the sub-question to that is maybe there's opinions about whether they should or shouldn't anyway. So, can I get some clarity, whether from Deb or from anyone, about just specifically this Gillette issue, because it kept being brought up as why would they be removing trees and we gave them approval to? Because I apologize. Frank's, I guess is the company, said we gave them approval to remove trees. So I don't know if anyone here even knows about this, or if it's something that I should.
This wasn't one of ours. This was the zoning board, I think. I don't recall it coming to us.
It was a zoning board.
Yeah. But
And
nonetheless,
that's part of
nonetheless.
the other issue. So, like, I'm the planning board liaison, and this would be the second time now that they're like, well, the planning board did this, the planning board, and I had to, like, dig back into, and I happened to have one of your spreadsheets that had old applications, and I was like, no, I was like, that was the zoning board, and it was also in, like, 2018. You know, and I'm not, like, criticizing the Shade Tree Commission members, my colleagues or anything, but, like, I think sometimes the planning board is just getting the stamp
Well,
of,
that's where they start.
yeah, so.
The difficulty, as I see it, is that for years, the Shade Tree Commission has been lobbying the Township Committee for an ordinance that would allow them to vote on the removal of trees on private property. And the Township Committee has consistently ignored that request, and after 10 years of lobbying, last year, the Township Committee finally adopted an ordinance that says homeowners have to register if they intend to cut any tree more than 12 inches.
Yes.
But the registration is without any review. You just file the paperwork and you get it back. And I've done that for trees that I have no intention of cutting soon, but I just want to get the paperwork in place so that if they ever make the ordinance a little bit tougher and want to start charging fees, I've already got pre-approval. But at any rate, any property owner can cut any tree on his property off the right-of-way, only if it's more than 12 inches, they have to register, otherwise we don't care. The Shade Tree Commission gets no vote. If a homeowner wants to do anything to his property which is within the ordinance, like add a room that doesn't violate any of the bulk standards, which means it doesn't have to come to the board, he has no obligation other than the registration of tree removal. Where the Shade Tree Commission runs into trouble is where a board has to see an application because there is site plan approval or variance involved, and at that point, they think that the board has powers that are over and above the powers that they don't have for every other circumstance. And as I see it, as a courtesy, we look at the forestry issues when we're looking at a site plan. But that's only as a courtesy to make sure that the applicant is doing what the ordinance says he has to do about replanting. But if he didn't have to come to the board, none of that review would happen anywhere. And so once again, we're penalizing the guys who are doing it honestly.
I think, if I'm right,
Go ahead.
it's more because you're talking about an application.
Yeah,
It's more
the
about-
permits are their own separate thing
Yeah,
I can
it's,
talk
it's
about.
more about, I think, who manages, after the fact, we approve something, zoning board approve, whoever approves it. Then it goes to planning and whatever, the construction official, whatever they check over. Who's validating that what was said is what was done, and what the consequences if something was done that wasn't supposed to be done, which I presume is what
Sure,
they're
that's
saying.
yes.
So if because in site plan we say, yeah, okay, you're going to take down these 5, you're going to plant these 10. And they end up doing, we're going to take down 10, we're only going to plant 5. So what's the protocol?
For
Who's
trees,
the
there's,
auditor?
for
Who
trees
wants
on private property, there's really no
Nope.
consequences.
Right.
If they don't follow the site plan that was approved,
The landscaping plan.
for the landscaping plan that's on the private property, they generally come back to either the township engineer with, a change, a minor change, or if they've cut down other trees that they weren't supposed to on that private property, all we do is say, okay, go register it. It's private property.
Now,
So
we
unless they're affecting the trees that are in the right of way, that's the only time the shade tree has jurisdiction.
So what stops the Shade Tree Commission from either coming to the planning board or the zoning board of adjustments when there's an application put forth?
They can come
Nothing.
all they want, but they don't have any jurisdiction.
I'm not asking for jurisdiction, but they get to have a comment during the public session.
Sure, if they want to.
Right, because that sheds light back to the boards, either board, to say, you can't take that tree down. It's on a registry, or it's in the right of way. Or, you know what, you're taking 4 down, you need to put 4 back.
Well, that's by ordinance.
Correct. But what I'm hearing is that they don't feel like they have a voice to say something. So the mechanism would be, if they
Yeah,
don't have a
pos-
seat here,
But
and
you're
Mr.
right.
Lavender, and Mayor Lavender is now on the Shade Tree Commission, I would say they should come when it's time to speak. I'm sure they're maybe watching tonight, but they should come when it's open discussion and then air their concern, so that way we can address it.
Sure, they could do that as public, members of the public and the committee, but the bottom line is unless the township committee changes anything, the only jurisdiction that the shade tree has is over trees that are in the right of way or in the township property.
Yep.
So.
The problem, Tom, is only, and you're absolutely correct, but the problem is they don't meet every month, they cancel meetings.
They've been meeting every month for the past year or so.
Okay,
But-
but we send them stuff and we never hear back. We don't have to send them stuff, but on occasion they ask for stuff and we send it to them and we never hear back, we never get comments. And then after the fact, they complain that they weren't heard. Well, that's because you weren't here in a timely way.
All right, but so, and this is the same thing I said to them, and I'm gonna say here. I can only relay and control for the time that I've been on the commission and the board. And so that's only been for the past, 2 and some odd years. And so, as far as I know, we've never had a situation where we've had to give them anything and they haven't responded. I'm sure that's happened in the past, and I'm just saying, and I said this to them, I can't control what happened in the past. Let's just try to figure out what we can to do to move forward.
The Delaware Avenue application, they asked
Sure.
for the opportunity to comment. We sent them the stuff, they never came back.
Okay, that's also
So
kind of in the past, but let me just
Only
point
last
out
year.
the other thing that I think that they want is, I think that the public session is obviously the appropriate time for them to comment during an application, but they want to get the materials when we get them so they can review it and even just write a 1-page opinion about the trees. And I don't know if that's something that we can accommodate or not. We
I
say
almost-
Delaware Ave, we get it, and we.
I almost think they need to take a proactive approach, because we do put the applications out in advance. So it
100%.
gives them an opportunity to take a look at what
Right.
is about to take place on that parcel of land. And they can absolutely write us a letter to give us guidance. It's the same thing I was asking for when it came to solar panels on roofs.
Which I'm
What
gonna
is the
get
guide,
to,
and,
yeah.
okay, so I won't jump that.
No, that's fine.
So, but that's the engagement I want, because that's only going to get us what we want in the end state.
So to me, it's no different than what we did with the demolition of a historical house,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Mhm.
There's a process to go. We try to strengthen up in the master plan history a little bit, right? To say that if there's demolition, at least gives a chance to come and, in this case, take photos or whatever. There's sensitivity on shade tree with obviously 10 inches or whatever that girth was, is there for a purpose.
Mhm.
So what are the sensitivities that the Shade Tree Commission may say, if one or more of this size tree or this type of tree is taken down, then let us know about it.
I think they want any time a tree is going to be removed.
Any, or I would be a bit more refined than that.
Okay, sure, but
I would be a bit
either
more-
way, how is it that they're going to find out? Do you agree
We
that
could,
it
we
should be
could, we could
proactive?
decide
I-
here and say, as part of the process, when these conditions are met, these are the people, historic, because it's in a historic house, in a historic area,
Right.
whatever, or this is a tree, or this is a landscape that's sensitive. So I would ask for clarification of not just everyone.
Okay.
If someone's going to cut down bamboo and in part of them, they only have bamboo on the site,
Right,
do
but
they really need to see that?
Where they're coming
They
from-
get to opine on it, right? If it's
That's right.
bamboo, they get to say, no, we don't care about it, I hate bamboo, I try to take it
Well,
off my
I
property
don't
as
know.
it is.
I would ask for some sort of,
Yeah,
some
well,
criteria.
They gave
to
us
start off
a
with.
dimension, 12 inches,
There you go.
right? So there is a criteria already set, but maybe they're more concerned about, if you're removing trees that are less than 12 inches, but they want to keep trees growing in that turnover, right? It's a two-way street, and I think that we got to kind of,
I'd like to hear from them what their criteria is.
yeah, I'd like to see,
And then
you
go from
thankfully
there.
are on that board, so you're carrying the message, but they need to come back to us. It's like, you can reach out to them and say, hey, we have an application coming up and they're gonna do X, Y, Z. And then it's like, okay, we need to write something, boom.
Right, so
you know,
that's what,
heads
so
up.
it's, but, so then I'm hearing two things. We need to fine tune the criteria of when they should be involved, but again, who is going to be and I don't know if it's me as the, liaison, and I can tell you, I can't.
The answer to that question is easy. The chairman of the Shade Tree Commission should come to the township committee and ask for an ordinance revision.
Correct.
It's
So
true,
in the
yeah.
absence of our attorney here tonight, I was going to ask a question of you on the historic component. It sounds like what you're talking about was then codified by ordinance.
We have a list of all the people who have to get the application when it comes in.
Okay.
And
Right.
they are not on that
And so-
list.
So let me just make sure, sorry, go ahead, I
So
know you've been trying to say.
this is a great opportunity to take what they're saying to us and what we want to react to, and then mutually come to some understanding that we can bring to the committee. Without that, we need to be very careful. They're without ordinance to give them power.
Okay,
They are members of the public on any application. So a member of the public, a resident, cannot write a letter and have it read into record as a public comment in one of our hearings. So that committee cannot write us a letter and have us take it
okay,
as
So it sounds like
comment
they have work to do.
yeah.
without an ordinance that allows them
Yep.
to, or coming and reading it on record.
Deborah's
So
got
in the
Deborah's-
interim, it needs to be publicly commented.
Deborah?
Yeah. Part of the frustration too, and Teresa, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you've heard this, and being an employee in town hall and dealing with this, you're talking about, let's just say an average, 9 out of 10 applications that come across my desk as the zoning officer for additions or things like this. Okay, 1 or 2 of those applications are gonna come to a board. So that means that the shade tree, even further, like, the shade tree only has communication with the clerk's office if they Oprah what the current tree registrations are. Because the way the ordinance is written, anybody who's doing any addition approved by the board, like I said, they go into, they register their trees, done. So we're not, like the zoning officer, the construction department, we're not following up on any of that. That's not our jurisdiction. Do you know what I'm saying? So I don't know, I mean, it's really up to the township committee at this point.
Here's
to
what I
change.
said, if I might just jump in again. Master plan, right? We've got the conservation and sustainability. And I think we've spoken to them in the past about this, but I don't know if your comments directly related to the master plan or it's just a general comment. However, I think this is the time for them to look at it and come up with these suggestions, say, why not think about anything that's said? Again, I like the criteria, obviously I like the criteria because I said it, but something that gives us some sort of teeth to say, this makes sense, and it's not just a blanket, you get everything. And there's nothing them get everything, they will get everything they can. But are there specific condition criteria we have to submit, or Deb has to submit the plans to them as well? No different to
No, and David, that's a
Historical.
good point, because then when they come with the ordinance for a consistency review, it will fall in line, because that's where the master plan works with then the ordinance.
Yeah.
Is the township committee will turn to us and say, is it consistent with the master plan?
There's not much point in putting something into the master plan purely on emotion if an ordinance cannot follow.
correct, and that's what I
No,
was
but
going to say.
And I
what we're
think
saying.
we have experience between Shade Tree and the Township Commission that a strict ordinance will not follow as draconian as the Shade Tree Commission would like.
And that's fine, but we can come up with some suggestions through the master plan as a recommendation to the town, within the plan, say
Yeah, we're think
Whatever
tanking, we're think tanking, so we're kicking ideas
Yeah.
back and forth. This is not gonna be hard and fast after tonight. There's gonna be some conversation going back and forth.
Typically, the Shade Tree Commission letters are advisory in other municipalities,
Right.
so
100%.
they review it and they get their opportunity to comment in a letter that becomes part of the record. But in reality, the board doesn't necessarily have to do anything.
Right,
Right,
and
agreed.
that's.
No, agreed.
But can I ask something on that? It sounds like what we're saying is here, we can't and shouldn't do that because that's not even a part of the like, we shouldn't even be accepting an advisory letter
Right, you need an ordinance to
Right.
even
to
have
even
that.
have advisory. Okay, great. I just wanna make sure I'm
Now,
following.
now on the flip side of what Liz, let me add to what Liz is saying too, a lot of municipalities will make it, part of the ordinance for land use, for the review of an application for like a shade tree commission or an HVAC or whatever, to review a commercial site plan, not residential. Residential is always out, because that can put undue harm, or undue,
Yeah, cost generative.
cost, right, exactly, to a homeowner. So generally, the type of review that you're talking about, and I think that the shade tree ultimate, I know the shade tree does not like residential people because I hear it all day long. So I get that, but really the only jurisdiction or the only time that they should be offering an advisory opinion would be a site plan application.
That's fine.
And it could be a major site, I mean, there
Right.
are different.
Right.
Right.
No, that's
So
fine.
the specifics, yeah, it's out, but just generally speaking, as it stands, right now, they actually don't even have jurisdiction to be providing us an advisory opinion, and they don't have jurisdiction to ask for or receive, like, as part of your checkbox, like, send to Shade Tree Commission, like, can't do that right now.
Right, unless there's actual right-of-way trees involved or any of the
Right.
township property trees involved, really, yes.
And what it sounds like you're saying is, at least for now, suggest to them to just be proactive on their own and just come in
And
as
come to
part
the
of
mic.
public comment.
Sure.
And my understanding is that's the same status that the Environmental Commission has, correct? They're not
No,
reviewing applications.
no.
Is
They
there
do
an
not have the
ordinance?
same status as the environmental for a very technical reason. State statute says a copy has to go to the Environmental Commission if the municipality has a formal environmental plan. And we don't have a formal environmental plan, and therefore we do not have to put the Environmental Commission on the list. And in fact, when we did process improvement, we specifically took environmental off the list because Environmental Commission specifically has not prepared a township-wide environmental plan. And that is more strict than, because it specifically mentions them, that's more strict than the Shade Tree Commission is subject to. The township could put them on, but it's not on the basis of any
But that's
malfeasance.
driven by state statute, not local ordinance.
That state statute says the Environmental Commission only has to get a copy if there is a local environmental plan.
But we can usurp that. Like, we can,
Well, the Environmental Commission has always been getting.
yeah, so we
Most,
can.
yeah, not residential applications,
Right.
No,
yeah.
commercial.
But commercial applications, right. And 9 out of 10 times, we haven't got a response.
Right, but because they probably say we don't have much power.
Well, either that or because these boards, this town, does such, like, as Joe was mentioning, has such an extensive review, over environmental issues between the DEP and our own regulations.
Now,
What could they say?
What situations does the Shade Tree Commission have absolutely no authority over?
Are you like quizzing me on what we just?
Well, starting with utility rights-of-way.
Railroads.
Huh?
Railroads.
And those rights-of-way get cleared better and better every year for the past 20 years.
And we hear complaints.
Any tree that interferes with an overhead power line, they just come chop it down or cut a hole in it or something. Any tree on county, state, federal, or township property, they have no authority over because the board has no authority over those buildings or school property.
But I don't think they're trying to they're not talking about trees that they want to have authority over or something.
Well, I'm just
No, I
listing
know.
this.
I'm just letting you know that they're not telling.
I'm just listing the 60% of the trees in town that they have no authority over.
That's fine. You're just talking about.
So what they're doing is they're grasping at straws.
No, they're not. No, they're not. No, they're not.
No, I
They're
think
looking
we're
at.
making
No,
progress.
let me just go back.
I agree.
So two things. Part of the process, right, an ability to opine, and what consequences are there to the developer or whomever after the fact, and they've done something that they shouldn't have done, what are the penalties? And who's monitoring that?
And it sounds like we really can't do anything about that.
There's
at
really,
least on
yeah,
the
there's
planning
no,
board.
Well, there's nothing now. Who's to say there shouldn't be something in the future?
Well, that's up to the committee.
And it's
Right, that's up to
delineating
us in the
between
master plan as well to
commercial
say
and residential.
We
You have
should
to
be,
delineate between
maybe
that.
because the sensitivities around this is such these days, that maybe there should be an added
Sure,
criteria.
there could be fines
Especially
based on.
that's why about criteria. If
Yeah.
you've got a big 100-year-old tree, you might want to have a bit more sensitivity around that.
It
We
might be
may-
on the registry already.
Right. And we may not notice it because this is just like a big circle on the site plan. Right? It's not as if they're going to say,
Yeah.
oh, well, be careful because they want
This
to.
is always an issue, especially when you're talking about significant.
So I think we can do something. We can make some
Did you
suggestions.
get the information you needed, Teresa?
Yes, I did. No, and
Okay.
then, I feel like I'm complete, so I'm gonna move on.
Please
In the
move on.
interest of being timely. And so, Tom, to your point, the other thing that,
Solar panels?
the solar panels, what Susan and the Shade Tree Commission suggested is, hey, let's find a time where they can come in and chat about it with us. Do they have the authority to come in and talk about the solar panel and removal of trees and
Sure, but it still falls under the classification of private property, so what,
well, I think we were more looking for input
Guidance.
for the master plan.
well, so what type of guidance?
Guidance on,
Well, the master
How many-
plan has to decide whether the town is better off with solar panels or trees. Which has precedence?
The master plan
Both.
doesn't decide that, the individual.
Well, the master plan should make a recommendation so we can square the ordinances away.
But
Yeah, Tom was
Right,
gonna
but-
talk about the master plan part of it.
it's really, though, gonna depend on the solar.
Right, the
extent
private
of
property.
the solar panel, meaning if it's a single-family homeowner versus somebody who wants to put in a huge
Solar farm.
Solar, right.
farm.
Does it matter? The tree is gonna be cut one way or the other, whether it's commercial
Sometimes it's
or
how-
residential.
No, it's
well, you don't
how
want
many
people
trees.
clear cutting their property,
Yeah.
right? You don't
Although
want
they're allowed
that
to
just
do
to
that.
get, huh?
People are allowed to do that in this
To
town.
clear cut their property.
You're talking about the difference between topping trees for the solar on the roof.
So that way they
Yes.
can
Clearing
get,
trees for a solar farm.
Right.
That's a big
Yeah, that's a
difference.
big difference.
Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
thank you.
So just to make sure that like everyone's very clear, what is it that you would want specifically to hear from the Shade Tree Commission? Just to make sure that we're like, you know what I mean, like
I would
keeping
give,
the,
I would give them
So-
the elements and ask them to respond to the elements and make any other suggestions that they have.
That's,
And it's
rather
simple
than
as
coming
that.
to a public meeting, I would suggest.
That's what we did with
right.
HPAC,
and
that's
that-
what we've done with
and
others.
now I'm kind of like, not concerned, but are we allowed to ask them for that
Oh, yeah.
without any
Absolutely.
sort of like jurisdiction? or-
Absolutely.
it's
It's a different
Okay.
process.
They are-
than
they-
Public application.
Okay.
of specific-
Just a bigger picture, I mean, just personal opinion, I want to see more interaction with the committees like HPAC and REC and environmental, because they've got to be part of the model and sets the scene. They should have input to that scene
Absolutely.
and monitoring process to that.
So I'll provide them
Absolutely.
with, is the master plan subcommittee okay with me providing, as they stand now, those certain elements?
Yes,
Well,
Or do you
there's
wanna
not a
wait?
committee right now.
yes.
Oh,
So that was disbanded as of the,
right.
it has
And-
not been
Was
reconstituted.
the planning board,
And we have in the past tried, or we have,
Yeah,
so
it
I would
has not been
absolutely.
reconstituted
They are official body of
at
the
this,
town.
at this
Okay.
juncture.
and which elements should I provide them, if, or just all of the whole thing?
I would certainly give them sustainability, conservation, and maybe open space,
Okay,
those three.
wait, let me just make
Parks
sure,
and
because
Rec.
I'll forget, sustainability,
Open space,
conservation, and open space.
They can, in the interim of not
Yeah,
having a
it's the same.
specific,
it's the same, okay.
set up committee, they can also contact Liz, our planner,
Mm-hmm.
who has been, the key person of putting everything together currently for the master plan. So they can send her ideas too.
Okay, so instead of having them comment, it's actually probably more efficient and effective to just have them comment on those.
Because they may give it more thought, because they're
Sure,
writing it
that's
down.
fine. Okay.
If the Shade Tree Commission would like to intelligently help the planning board resolve the issue of which is more important, we would welcome their participation with us. Come to the meeting and let's talk it out. But sooner or later, we're gonna have to decide what's more important. Again, in the rooftop situation, I'm not sure about the ground level operation, clear cutting, but sooner or later, we're going to have to make a decision, because we cannot take every single instance that's brought before us as a board judgmental action.
The solar farm, by the way, as Joe will tell you, produces a whole new stormwater management related issues as well. Because you are creating impervious surface,
Exactly.
essentially like roofs, all over now the property. And so stormwater becomes a big issue as well.
Somebody will invent a pervious solar panel that's got little holes in it. It's inevitable.
Anyhow, Teresa,
so-
thank you for bringing this to light.
No, and thank you all for your
and,
input. I think this was very helpful, and I feel like honestly, for almost 2 years, for me, I've been going around in circles, and probably because I haven't addressed it head on in this way. We've been so busy, honestly. So I'll go back to them with this, and I think we have at least,
Are
it's not
those-
what they're gonna wanna hear, but I think it's actually the right
And
answer.
if
And I'd
you
like to
could,
hear their responses back.
Do you have any other issues?
Come to our meeting on
Yeah,
Monday,
yeah.
it's at the first aid school.
Do you have any other issues to bring up?
No,
Because
ma'am.
I have a few.
Are they relevant to the Shade Tree Commission?
Yes.
And are you the
Specific to the
liaison?
Shade Tree Commission, your turn to
Suddenly
carry
aligned, Georgia.
your turn to carry a message back.
Okay,
One, every now and then, we make reference, including in the ordinance, to the so-called big tree list. Under no circumstances can you cut a tree on the big tree list. Well, the problem is the big tree list was created in the late 90s. It is more than 25 years old. You would expect that the life expectancy of a quarter of the trees has caused at least a quarter of the trees on the big tree list to die by now. I know of several that are dead and one that was deliberately cut down by the county in spite of the fact that it was on our big tree list. The Shade Tree Commission has got to update that list. And if we're going to prohibit homeowners from cutting down those trees under any circumstances, which is what we attempt to do in the registration ordinance, then that list has got to be up to date and concise. And the Shade Tree Commission has been ignoring this request for 25 years to keep that list up to date.
okay, so just as we were saying to them, I just wanna make sure, is this list a part of the ordinance? Because if it is, then the response is gonna be the same on the flip side, which is the town.
Homeowners cannot cut down a tree
no.
that's on the big tree list.
And where's that list? Is it by ordinance?
The ordinance refers to the big tree list. The big tree list is not in the ordinance, but it's available on the
Manage it?
website.
It's on the
Shade Tree
website.
manages-
Yeah.
Okay, so
And that should
Shade
be-
Tree manages this list that is
Yes.
referenced in an ordinance.
And we could put that into, I can't remember if we did or not, in the master plan, say they have to
about
update, we did talk, update it, I can't remember.
And Shade Tree wraps itself in the flag of the big tree list without realizing that the list is
Right.
possibly obsolete.
Okay, all right, I will let them know, and it sounds like it's being incorporated into the master plan.
Okay,
next,
item number 2.
Two. I'm taking notes, Dennis.
Okay, take notes, and then I'll give you the next
No,
item.
no, I'm ready. I'm more than ready.
Okay. In the ordinance, in the zoning ordinance, there is a list of trees that have to be used. 40% from tier A, 20% from tier B. If you cut trees on your property, you have to plant new trees according to this schedule. Now, our third prior township engineer, I'm going back to Tom Lemanowitz now, he argued that some of the trees on that list are inappropriate for us. They are not native trees, and they shouldn't be on the list of required plantings. That list is more than 20 years old, and that list is in the ordinance and will require an ordinance revision in order to bring the list up to date. But that list has to be scrubbed. I will send you the ordinance number when I get home and look for it. But that list has to be scrubbed, brought up to date, and made totally conforming with whatever Rutgers Forestry Department
We did have-
says are native
I
trees.
think we had that in the master plan, didn't we?
I think so, but I was gonna, can I jump on your bandwagon here? Because I think what also would be helpful is beyond trees, is, cause for instance, you know, oftentimes we ask for landscaping, let's say between two homes or whatever. And there should be some recommendations of, and perhaps it's by ordinance, maybe it's not, but that it preferred, usually, you know, non-invasive,
We did,
things that are
I'm
deer
sorry,
resistant.
we did put that in, we did
Yeah.
put that in the master plan.
But that's
We did talk
something that
about it.
That would be a great thing for the Shade Tree to, you know,
Work on.
yeah, to work on and to opine on.
We
If
will,
they
yeah.
want to opine on something, they don't have any control over residential properties, okay, well, give us lists. Give the board's list of things that you want to see planted, especially if you're making, you know,
And this is not a formal request, but just as an aside, when we talked about bamboo last year at great length at the Township Committee, they were talking about calling in experts to teach us all about bamboo and the invasiveness of bamboo. Nobody ever mentioned the Shade Tree Commission. Now,
you can come to my
admittedly,
house and I'll
bamboo
show you
is
how
not a
invasive
shade
it is.
tree per se, but presumably that's where the experts are in this town, is on that commission. And nobody was asked to come and give an opinion, and nobody came voluntarily to give an opinion. Shade Tree was absolutely silent and invisible in the bamboo dispute. And I'm
Well, that's
wondering
not
why.
us, right? That's not the planning, I'm not gonna ask them that.
Okay. Well,
Next,
no,
what's number 3?
you can take it back, or you can invite me to the next meeting and I'll ask them.
No, but there are things also.
She just
in-
said it's on Monday,
In addition
next
to
week.
non-invasive, things like.
No, it was yesterday, actually.
Deer-resistant species is often, because, people will be like, okay, we're putting this between 2 properties, and then it gets eaten by deer. So it's just that, those are the
Oh,
kinds
the
of things I'd be
arborvitae,
interested in.
deer candy?
Yeah.
So for number 1, the list they have to update. Number 2, provide your input.
Yeah, I mean, I just
Okay.
think it's something that maybe they could work on, it's something.
that ordinance, right?
And again, it may or may not need to be by ordinance, I don't, I mean, that's
Yeah,
subject to
especially if they
discussion.
wanna have input, just to have
Okay.
guidance.
Is that
Guidance.
something they're
And you
they're
have to
qualified to do, though? Would you
Yeah.
need a landscape
Yeah,
architect
yeah.
to make the...
Well, Guy, well, I guess he
I
wasn't
don't
the
know
mayor.
who's on the
Deputy
I
mayor.
don't know, our landscape
Thinking
architects
about
on
it,
Shade
it's
Tree
more.
Commission?
So I don't know.
Al Gallo is, to the extent that he knows, obviously, I'm sure, quite a bit about this. I'm trying to think of, I mean, trust me, the people on the Shade Tree Commission know a lot about
So maybe they're.
plants.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
they're, but I don't know all of their occupations, I just know Al is on there.
No,
I'm just trying to think of who
The question
other-
was, are they qualified? And it sounds
Okay.
like there are people on there who are qualified.
I mean, you really need arborists, because it's not, it's not just the invasive species too, it's the pests
Here's the list.
that are attacking our trees. It's the diversity of
No, I just don't know what they
species.
do.
The other thing is drought resistancy, because droughts, we're in a drought, believe it or not. I mean, drought resistant planting too, that would be helpful in the guidance as well. So I think you've got a holistic guide that would really be helpful coming out of
You
this.
got enough agenda item there for the next meeting.
No, this is going in an email, and this is just gonna be.
Was that all the comments you
Were
had,
tho-
Dennis?
Were those all your numbers?
153.1B
For the
is
Big tree.
where the list is.
big tree?
Under landscape design, shade trees shall be planted on all sites at a rate of not less than 10 trees per acre. Group A, white flowering dogwood, red flowering dogwood, crimson cloud
that's not the big
I
hawthorn.
think we need to read it.
Big tree list
Got
is
it.
on your committee website,
Okay,
Yeah.
And the question is,
1993,
okay.
last updated.
the question, excuse me, may I finish?
You completed.
Thank you.
How many trees are there? How many trees are there?
Significant.
Well, there's 4 in Group A, there's 6 in Group B, and there's 6 in Group C. And you have to do a percentage from each group. And there's all kinds of regulations, and 8 feet tall, 8 feet high at planting, not located in any required buffer area. And interestingly enough about that is that mostly when neighbors come to complain, they want trees along the buffer area. And the ordinance says you can't plant these trees from these lists in the buffer area. So a whole lot of thought has to go into revising 153.1. And that's up to the Shade Tree Commission if they want to tackle the job. Otherwise, I will.
Okay, all right, so I have a lot to go back
And
to
I'm a
them
tree
with.
killer.
Oh, help me, Lord.
I'm not telling them that, although this is, I'm sure they're listening, because they knew I was gonna bring this up, so they're probably.
That's fine.
All right, that's all that I have, and I think that this was helpful, and I will go back to them with a lot of this next month, the end of February.
Right.
Honestly, I'm probably gonna send an email so they're prepared for the end of February, and then.
And make sure they give you as much time at their meeting as they ask you to take at our meeting. Make sure they don't cut you off, just
Thank you for
because
what you
you
do.
are the,
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Or cut you down, one of the two.
Oh.
well, they can do that with a permit.
Sure, I'll see what
There's-
form I have it in. I may want it in like a separate.
Perfect.
I have like
Didn't like
Liz's
a word.
full PDF, but yeah. Okay, that's it.
Good.
Okay, next meeting is in 3 weeks from tonight. It will be the hearing on the Gates Avenue subdivision. We have the paperwork in hand, and I assume that the reports from the consultants will be coming out shortly.
Yes, they will be.
so that we have more than enough time to look at them.
Review.
I looked at the drawings, and quite frankly, I'm waiting for a report from an expert as to how to interpret it. You know, it's still a two-lot subdivision, that's all I can tell you with certainty. All the rest of it, you'll have to read the reports. We will deal with that 3 weeks from tonight. And that's all I have. If anybody has anything else?
Yeah, two things. One, the township committee had passed down to us a couple of items that we were working on. One being and they were talking about it last week. Let me just put a blank on it.
ATV noise.
ATV, and it sounds like Mr. Fidgen is now taking that back and going to write an ordinance. So are we to stop doing any work on that?
We, in the November meeting, we looked at a draft of an ATV ordinance and voted 7-0 to send it forward to the township committee. Nothing happened because it was too late in the year for the township committee to introduce it and get it through the 35-day process with our review and adopt it before the end of the year. So it will be adopted presumably at the next meeting, or it will be introduced at the next meeting, but we've already been through the
Okay.
process on
I
that.
think Mr. Fidgen is writing an ordinance, so you may want to take a look at the last TC meeting.
Well,
because it was
they have a formal conveyance from us.
Okay,
And if Pigeon is
Then there's
writing an
nothing more-
ordinance,
all
that
right,
means
good.
he's copying ours.
so then we're done on that one. We have short-term rentals. That's been with us.
The township administrator has taken that into her care.
Okay, so then we're not doing anything more
We're
on
doing
short-term-
nothing with that. She asked us to
Okay.
let her handle that.
Okay,
Hang on a second, because it got confusing with that permit stuff that had nothing to do with short-term rentals. So is that,
is that the 455 thing?
whatever it was?
4 feet, 4-story, 55? was
No,
that
no,
what
no,
you
no,
said?
that was,
Okay,
No,
that was on the website, which is nothing to do with short-term rentals.
right,
We were
that's
going to
right.
write a little memo, weren't we, Liz, I think, about what we should be considering. How is that different to what you just said?
Say again?
You said the township administrator is doing something
With short-term rentals.
with short-term rentals. The conversation I recall is that you found or she found the permit.
We found a permit application no, it's not a permit application, it's just a registration application on the website.
Right.
And I asked her, what are we supposed to do with this since the application already exists? And she said she'd take care of it.
Yeah, and I think we collectively agreed that had nothing to do with what we were talking about. And I think even if you asked her, she'd probably say the same thing. And I'm still looking for something personally to see where we go from Liz. That's where I recalled it being.
And it was with Liz.
What are you looking for?
One pager on short-term rentals and some, because we went through a number of items,
Right, right.
whether it's 1 week or 3 months or whatever it may, all those criteria. And we're going, I think that what you said is a red herring to what we were doing. That's what I recall from our last conversation. So, my
Right.
mind, I'm still waiting for something on short-term rentals from us. Unless they come back and Nancy says, no, this is distinctly different, we are doing something specific to short-term rentals, but that's not the impression I was left with in our last
I
conversation.
would agree with you, I would agree with that.
That's all I'm
So
saying.
we need clarification.
We need some clarification from Nancy that what she's doing and that may then determine what my mind, they're separate. That's my mind, but that's simple.
So that's still open.
If in fact they revisit the existing form and decide that there is a zoning matter, then we will have to take it up. But at this point, it's not a zoning ordinance matter. And
Well,
and personally, I'm not sure how it could be.
I disagree with that approach based on what we discussed last time.
Do you want to attempt to write an ordinance that's lawful, that
No.
would allow the board to hear these and vote on them?
No, because we left it with Liz to write up based upon the work that we did previously to do. Otherwise, why am I wasting my time? We're going through this is the third time we've had this conversation. I'd like something formal from Township Committee. What are they doing? And where are we looking at something? Because I've said exactly what understood. I've got nothing more to say.
So maybe, Dennis, you have to go back to the township committee and ask for a formal statement. Are we to continue to work on it or not?
Well, I think our two committee persons should.
Well, these sorts of things come and go. I must remind you that in July, the township introduced an ordinance on property maintenance. And they talked about it in August, and they talked about it in September, and they stopped talking about it.
Then what's the
So
point?
property maintenance is absolutely up in the air.
And
Well, the
short-
public-
And it is not uncommon, it
But
is
that's
not
with them.
uncommon,
But
please
that's-
let me finish the answer.
Okay, sure.
It is not uncommon for the township committee to get started on these things and then let them die. Now, Airbnb has not come up in the past 6 months, and if they aren't pushing us, and the administrator says it's hers, then
I would like something formal, and I'll repeat myself one more time.
I think we got all of the positions now. I
Thank
think what we're lacking are 2 township representatives to
I would agree.
comment
I would agree.
tonight,
Yeah.
is the bottom line. So
Agreed.
we gotta come back to
Okay.
the township.
My last item that I have is regarding the Tifa site. Tomorrow, I will have a strategy meeting with Brendan and Alan, to just put a strategy together on how we're going to take this forward. And then every 2 weeks after that, we'll have meetings where we will engage PRISM, we will engage bring in some residents to get their feedback, and then we will work towards presenting to this board.
I look forward to it.
Hey, Dennis, have you got that thing?
That's it from me.
Do you have that paper for Tifa?
Yeah.
Maybe you can suggest to Tifa, if they haven't got a picture that they can put on front of welcome to whatever it is, that they could put that picture of that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the most inviting, I don't know if that's attracting you to go to the,
This is what
this is showing what they
Feeling
mean.
fog for
You could do that in a fog.
Todd in Central Folk Advocator, Tifa. So they
what it's called?
take a photo of that and ask them, is it okay to take a photo, Sean? And just ask them to
There was like a duck
build that into the site
that like my family
somewhere.
owns, and I just need their bookkeeping. which is
Yeah.
Actually, Don has a picture already, he can email it to you.
I have a photo, I can send it to you if you want. I got a
Oh,
good
that's
photo.
interesting. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, motion to dismiss.
No, we've got master plan.
All right.
Did we do that already?
All right, Mr. Chairman, how are we doing?
We're waiting for you to make a motion.
Make a motion.
Hang on a second, what about master plan? Were we not going to discuss that or not for 2 minutes?
Um,
Where we are with Liz and how the work's going and,
I
Thank-
received comments from
Yes.
everybody on the board, except for a couple people. And we're working through them. Dennis is still working through his comments, which have been very helpful, mostly. And we're still, I'm working through them.
and I just, I've given my comments on the land use.
Yeah,
The other elements we've already discussed in the past, I wasn't going to do that.
Yeah.
So my impression is you're going to digest the stuff, make some changes, wordsmith, reformats the simple stuff, if you will.
There is some simple stuff, and there's some editing that's, gonna be a little bit time-consuming, but it's necessary. Paring down, simplifying.
Yep.
And then there are some other more policy decisions and, some more, factual information that needs to be addressed.
And that's what you're going to bring back to us for
Yeah,
for more
when it's
substantive
ready to go,
conversation.
I don't
Yes.
wanna bring it back before.
We didn't
Yeah,
want to bring it back
there'll be
piecemeal.
more discussion 5 weeks from tonight, which is the next open meeting that we have.
February 28th.
Okay, that's good enough.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The 28th, yeah, the last day of February.
Okay.
Good, yep, thank you for bringing that up.
Don,
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.